This is a journey into sound.
Mission control to intervention 1. Do you read me? Countdown T-minus 10 seconds. Systems check. Commencing countdown in 3, 2, 1. Blast off.
The lights come on, the set is down, the curtains float away. To all you creatures of the night, I say it's time we play. We'll show you things that in your life you never dreamed you'd know. And now before the ghosts arrive, it's welcome to the show.
Greetings, Valparaiso. This is Ken the Metal Professor. It is time for Mostly Metal here on WVLP, sort of. Normally this show is mostly metal, and then later on in the 2 o'clock block, I turn it into the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program. But we're going topsy-turvy tonight, and we're going to hit the wrestling stuff first, which is pretty exciting. My guest in the studio is Tony Regan.
What's going on?
And you're already a WVLP veteran, I think we can say. So the reason we're doing this is he was in earlier from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock as a guest on the show Eat NWI, where he was talking about his alter ego as the average guy gourmet.
Yes.
And so we had a lot of fun, and I got so hungry sitting there listening to all that talk about food. It was incredible. And I also know that you're a big fan of comics, and so what we really ought to do is get you in here for a triple header, because on Monday nights there's a show called Nerds After Dark, which is all about nerd culture and comics and things like that.
I'm good with that. I have over 16,000 comic books. So.
Oh my gosh. And I mean, just the whole alter ego thing is very, so you know, you got your wrestling cape and you have your chef your cook cape, and how many different personalities do you have?
If you ask my wife, it's way too many.
So anyway, we're going to not just make him sit around twiddling his thumbs until 9 or 9:15, like I would normally start with a guest. We're just gonna hit the ground running. And so to really make it official, I'm actually going to kick this off with the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program theme stuff. It's not really a theme song, but just to get in the mood, this is what I normally play at the start of that show, and just to make it official, here we go. We're starting the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program on WVLP 103.1 FM in Valparaiso, Indiana.
Your insubordination will not be tolerated.
And now it's official. It's the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program, a special early edition. I'm excited to be joined in the studio by Tony Regan, who has had a, can I call it a long, illustrious career?
I don't know that I would call it illustrious, but I've been around for a while.
Uh-huh. And I'm going to admit, I guess, that I didn't know as much as I should, because you had mentioned during the earlier show, the cooking show, that it you know, in terms of performance in the ring, that you were pretty much retired.
Yes.
And I had just pictured it as I saw you a while ago, and I saw you recently, and I just hadn't caught you in between. But it was obviously a little bit more significant than that.
No, I guess officially retired back in 2014.
Okay.
When I had my last match on my 40th birthday.
Oh, nice.
And then
who was that against?
It was against, that would have been at AAW in Bourbon Street, Marinette Park in Illinois. It was me and Ryan Boz, who works there, against Keith Walker and Tweak Phoenix in a Bourbon Street fight. I actually jumped off the second-story balcony there.
Oh, my.
Fun stuff like that. And then I've done a couple of matches here and there. I worked Johnny Motley at Fire Pro. That was a couple years back. And then one of my good friends, Mike Horning, he said, okay, I had a kid, I'm retiring. So I just did a match with him over at Crash Tested Wrestling.
And I was there for that. That was a lot of fun. That was my first Crash Tested show I'd been to. And I didn't realize that it had been that long since you had been in the ring, and I didn't even realize till either during the match or after that it was a retirement match for Mike, because it didn't seem like a whole big stink was made about that going into it.
Mike, neither one of us were Crash Tested regulars. They kind of did the matches just because everybody there was friends with us. And they said, hey, you and Mike need a place that's local enough for all your family and friends to go to see Mike off. Because anybody who was willing to put the match on was a little bit far for family to drive.
Sure.
And, he wanted his family and friends to see. And then I'm a youth football coach, and I'm involved in my son's wrestling. So they had kind of a carload of kids come out who had never seen me wrestle, obviously, because I had gotten out of it years ago, and they were well too young at that point. So they, all the kids I coached kind of really got a kick out of it. So it was something that was just close enough that everybody could get to. So then, like I said, the booker's a friend of mine, and he said, yeah, we'll go ahead and do this for you guys. And because, we know people are going to come, so it's worth it for them, worth it for us.
And were you sort of handpicked by Mike as the person he wanted to have his retirement match? But I mean, that's got to be pretty special for somebody to do that.
We started together. I started about a month before him in training school, and he came to a training camp, and we basically trained together. We traveled together. We always worked together. When we had that match, neither one of us, he hadn't been in the ring in about a year, and I hadn't been in the ring in about 2 years. And that was both of us, so that's a lot of ring rust. And I think the match came off pretty well for
it did.
Not being in the ring. So, and that's, I completely credit to that, just to the fact that we know each other so well.
And so both of you had been out of the ring for a while. You're going to do a comeback, try to shake off the rust a little bit. And your first thought was, I know, let's make it a ladder match.
Well, the thinking behind that was, like I said, I'm going to be 44 this year. And I know my cardio is nowhere near what it used to be. And the fact that I've been out of the ring, that means I have no ring cardio. So how can I put on a match that's going to entertain the fans and really keep them involved in it without being able to go? And the way you do that is some smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
So the smoke and mirrors was a little bit of hardcore. Chairs, ladders, thumbtacks, the little things.
Can you try to explain to folks who it might not be, and it's not that obvious to me, although I think I'm getting a little bit more aware of it, of just how much cardio training you need to be able to go in a decent length match? I
mean, it's rough because you can get out and run every day, and you're just not going to have it. There's a different type of cardio. We call it's ring cardio, because taking the bumps, running the ropes, those things really wind you. So you can go out and run every day, and you'll still have a hard time with a 5 to 10 minute match. So it's just a whole different world.
Is there a sport that you can sort of draw a parallel to it, in the sense that it isn't just constant motion, it's a lot of hard starts, hard stops? I
would say if you do interval training, like the hard sprints, slow jog, hard sprint, slow jog, that's going to get you the closest to it. It's just because your heart rate's up, your heart rate's down, your heart rate's up, your heart rate's down. So that's going to be like my son does school wrestling, like folk style, Greco-Roman, whatever. And it's really the same for him, because his training is they start at one end of the room, they sprint, to the other wall and back, and then they got to wait for the next set of kids who are on this wall to do it. So you do a hard sprint, you stop. You do a hard sprint, so you're spiking and you're coming back down. And then his wrestling training is he's going all out for a minute and a half, then you stop. Then you go all out for a minute and a half. So it's just it's really weird, almost like hard sprinting, but then you got to be ready to hard sprint right away again.
Yeah, is that part of training more difficult to adjust to and get accommodated to than learning how to take back bumps and things like that?
For me, I was a gymnast, so bumping and all that stuff, it was almost natural for me. The cardio portion of it, I thought, I can run. This is no big deal. But in the beginning, running the ropes, the bruises you get just from running the ropes. But then just really getting that ring cardio, it's something if you lose, it's really hard to get back. Because the only way to get it and keep it is to constantly be in the ring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you're watching your son in his events, do you ever have any sort of, tongue-in-cheek cognitive dissonance where you want to yell at the ref or tell him to give somebody an eye poke or something?
A couple of his coaches are pro wrestling fans. And so
Nice.
I joke with them, and I said, hey, if Anthony's in trouble, you distract the ref, and I'll throw the chair in. And, or I said, I ask, are the walls of Jericho a legal move in this sport? I mean, so his head coach kind of rolls his eyes at me, but the other coaches, they laugh, and they were demonstrating a fireman's carry in one of the practices. And I usually sit at practices and watch, and the coach actually took a bump from the fireman's carry, and the two coaches just looked at me afterwards. And so it was kind of like we did that for you, and I'm like, yeah, you're finally teaching them real wrestling.
Nice. Is there anything that's remarkably similar between the two?
A lot of it is. A lot of it really is. I mean, when they lock up at the beginning of their matches, it is eerily close to our collar elbow tie-ups. You can see where the psychology of my wrestling comes from watching them learn their wrestling. A lot of that psychology is there. And my God, if I were to ever open a training school, I would start with that wrestling. Just to teach that, because there's so much there that it's like, you can see the origins of my sport in that sport, because obviously it evolved from it, but you can really see the origins of it and the psychology and why we're doing the things we're doing, because it's that. So it's like I said, if I had a school, that's where I would start. I would start with real wrestling and then work my way into our sport.
You've been at this since, you said about 2001, 2002 is when you
right in there.
sort of started?
I don't remember
Okay.
which year it was, but it was right in there. There's a fan that says he remembers seeing me at the end of 2001, so I'm going to just say it was 2001. I mean, that's a long time ago, and I've been hit in the head a lot. So.
You're doing fine. Maybe I'll have you count and follow my fingers from left to right a little later, but we'll see. So I was trying to do the math in my head. Your son is, you said earlier, you have kids that are 13 and 8. So you started this before you had kids?
Yes.
And so they've grown up having you involved in this.
Yes. Mostly my son, he was around it a lot.
Okay.
My daughter, not so much, because my daughter's only 8, so I was already on the way out. Because when my son was growing up, I mean, there was a point in time I was doing 4 or 5 matches a week. I was traveling a lot. So if I was in the Illinois, in the Chicago area, he was usually at a show. Because then that's when I'd hang out with him. So Anthony got to be at a lot of wrestling. We've got pictures of him just hanging out with Matt Hardy, at a bar and grill. And there's a funny story to that is Matt Hardy was eating dinner and a fan had come up to him because he was doing a signing that day. And my son said, "Yo, bro, he's eating." So Matt Hardy's like, "This is my guy now." And so they were just hanging out all night. They were more buddy-buddy than I was. So it was kind of like, he's hard to impress with wrestling. All his friends are like, "Oh, my God." He's like, "Yeah, I know that guy. My dad's friends with him." So for him, he's so much part of it. His 8th birthday, I brought a wrestling ring out to our cul-de-sac and put a show on. And, so the whole neighborhood, that's how much of a part of his life it's been.
And no matter what parents do, kids can sometimes, develop a little cynicism about it. Has he always been kind of, my dad does a cool thing, or have there been times where it's been more of a facepalm from him?
For him, he's not a fan of pro wrestling at all. But all of his friends are. So when they're around, of course he loves it. Oh, yeah, I love it. Look here's pictures of me and, WWE's Kalisto. Here's me and pictures of me and Seth Rollins. Here's me and pictures of, Matt Hardy. But then they leave. He takes the binder, throws it in the closet, and doesn't look at it until the friends come back over.
And so it doesn't sound like he has his eye on making his way into
No, he wants to be a football player.
Oh, okay.
So that's his thing. He wants to be a football player. That's where his eye is. He said if he's going into a regular job, it's an automotive engineer. But for sports, like a lot of young kids, he wants to be a pro athlete. He wants to be a football player.
Good. And he was doing really well in terms of wrestling recently. He was in a meet. You can brag about him a little bit.
Yeah, he was in. I'm from Illinois. He qualified for state for IKWF, which is Illinois Kids Wrestling Federation. There's 2 feds. There's IESA, which is the schools, and IKWF, which is the clubs. At 130-pound 8th graders, he went downstate. He won the first round, which put him in the top 16. He wasn't able to win in the second round. That's the second year in a row he's gone to state. So he went 7th grade, 8th grader. So he's a pretty darn good wrestler. Football, he plays tailback and he's a D end. He's won a couple Super Bowls. He did a little bit of QBing last year. So I mean, he's already taller than I am, which isn't very hard, but he is. Like I said, so he's about 13 years old. He's 140 pounds, about 5'8". So he's not a little guy.
Does he already have his eye on a particular college? If he's going to go that route?
He would like to go. He's a big Florida State fan, but he wants to go to a tech college. So he's a fan of one, but he's looking at. I can't remember which one, but he wants to go to it's one of the tech colleges. I don't know if it's Michigan or Texas A&M, but he wants to go to a technical institute with a strong football program.
Good for him. So best of luck with his.
Well, hopefully he can do that good that I'm not paying for college.
Exactly. And just to be fair, we can give your daughter a little time. What sort of athletic inclinations does she have?
She is a dancer and an actress. She's
That's
in
great.
dance and she's in a drama club. So those are the two things she does.
Good. My younger daughter has done gymnastics and a little bit of dance, and she's thinking about. She's played volleyball and basketball, but when she goes to high school next year, she's thinking about going the more drama club route. So we'll see how that goes. Kids are fun to watch and how they drift around with
until they find something they can dig their
interests.
teeth into. Yeah.
Now, when you were getting first started, back in let's just pick 2001 as our landmark. Were you living at home, and if you were, did you have family support for it?
No, I actually already owned a townhouse. I was out on my own, and okay. So here's what I've been a fan for a long time. I had always dabbled with it, and I actually had called feds before, and looked at training schools, and then drifted away and not done it. And I had been living with a girl for a while, and she just up and left me one day to drive to Texas.
Ooh.
And she was done, and we had a joint bank account. She left a bunch of money in there. I just went straight to the wrestling school, paid in full right off the bat, and said, "Okay, I'm going to be a wrestler." And that was it. It took getting dumped from somebody I was engaged to, and I said, "Screw this! I'm going to go live my dream now. I'm just going to go do this."
And then there's nobody around to say, "What is the matter with you?"
Right? No, that's exactly it. And like I said, I paid for the school up front, so I didn't have to worry about that. I already owned a house. So I didn't have to worry about that.
So this is episode 45, I think, if I'm counting right, of this Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program. And I've kind of decided when I hit 50, what I would like to do is bring in some folks and have a little roundtable discussion about what is it about wrestling, which is on its surface kind of a ridiculous endeavor that draws people to it so much. So what was it for you that made you say, I'm going to go from being a fan of this and watching it, I want to get in there and do that?
Well, I mean, the one thing is I'm a little bit older than a lot of guys, when I started and everything. So I didn't do the backyard thing, but I think we all, obviously, like you said, started as fans. As a little kid, I would, goof off and we'd make characters, me and my brother and our friends. And, well, it was more of a, goofing around. We wouldn't actually wrestle with each other. It was action figure stuff like that, would represent our characters. But it's getting into the late 90s. I saw guys, smaller guys, the Rey Mysterios, guys like that. I'm like, God, if they can do this, why can't I? Because before that, all I saw was your Hogans, all these giant people. And it's, obviously, I'm a cruiserweight. I'm a smaller guy. Even at my heaviest, I was a cruiserweight. So it's, when I saw those smaller guys in the late 90s, start to get into the scene, that's when it became like, I can do this. And that's when I started, and then the internet made research a little bit easier.
Sure.
And again, I'm older than most, so I was doing my research in the late 90s. And, so it became a little bit easier to find a place to train. I actually didn't know an independent scene existed until I started training. I knew WWF, I knew WCW, and obviously, like from the 80s, I knew the AWA, WCCW, things like that, but I didn't know there was an independent scene. So when I started digging and finding, and then, like I said, I looked into it, and then I got into a relationship, said, no, I'm going to be a grown-up. And then after that, I was just like, I had gotten so back deep into wrestling because the girl I was living with had kids. They liked it, and that kind of re-sparked my interest. And I was like, okay, screw this. I'm going to do it. I said I was going to do it, when I was a little kid, I pretended, and I said I was going to do it. So let's just do it. Let's just do it, and I can check a dream off.
That's neat. If you were a vacuum cleaner salesman, we could talk about your territory, so to speak. So when at the height of your immersion in this, what was your largest territory in terms of how far you would go on a regular basis to do shows?
I used to work on a regular basis out in Pennsylvania and New York for a guy named John Rambo. He had it's NLW and House of Pain Wrestling. I used to travel down to Arkansas, Osceola, with Mike Horning, the guy that I retired with. We would travel down there, and we were a tag team down there. We made regular trips to the Carolinas, high spots out there. Actually, they kind of partnered up with, I want to say it was Carolina Wrestling Association at the time. So we'd head out there, hang out at their little warehouse. They had dual rings in there. We'd work for them. And then going west, it was usually I'd go out into Des Moines a couple times into Minnesota, but really I didn't travel regularly anywhere other than Des Moines. I mean, I did the Quad Cities, Des Moines. I didn't go into Missouri at all just because of the licensing issues, things like that. So that mainly was it. It was more up and down the East Coast. West, I didn't go very far, though.
What were the average crowd sizes that you would get to, and what was the biggest that you ever got to perform in front of?
The biggest was probably when I used to work PCW in Chicago. Their Dream Nights would regularly draw 12 to 1,500 people. And I don't know if you saw the post today that I put on Facebook of me crashing through the table.
Yes.
That was actually a Dream Night, the first Dream Night I was in.
You look like a treble clef.
Yeah, I was basically, I had done a shooting star off the top rope to the outside through somebody on it. You may know Roach from Fire Pro.
Yes.
And that's who I was wrestling. And I had done a shooting star off the top to the table on the outside. But when I was planning this, the promoter, Rick Knight, had told us cruiserweights, if anybody goes in the crowd and touches a fan, I will kill you, and you will never wrestle again. So the whole time I'm trying to do the shooting star, I'm thinking, God, I'm going to overshoot this and land in the front row because it was really tight. So I under-rotated a little bit. That's why I'm so kind of broken like that. I under-rotated my shooting star, so instead of landing flat on my chest, I landed across my shoulders and throat. So my heels were kicking me in the back of the head. So, but that's probably the biggest crowd. I used to wrestle for Pro Wrestling Blitz, who ran in Joliet, and they would regularly get between 500 to 800 when I was there. That was really cool. The one down in Arkansas, while not the biggest, they would regularly draw about 300 people, but they were some old school fans. The heels were not allowed to leave the locker room at the end of the night. What the promoter would do was order food, have it brought there until the fan, and he had security cams. And he would wait for the fans to dissipate, and you would just sit there and drink beers and eat pizza in the locker room. The baby faces could leave, but the heels couldn't because the fans would wait for them. So, I mean, while not the biggest crowd, that was probably the most different than I'm used to crowd.
That's got to be enough material that you should write a book.
Maybe a series of blogs. I don't know about a book. I don't know that I got enough for a book. But
did you ever know back in those days that you would eventually get yourself into the food and cooking area?
God, no.
What was your diet like back then, and does it make you cringe?
No, I would eat a lot, but it would be real simple. Something like breakfast would be 6 eggs. I'd scramble 6 eggs, throw a little bacon in there, and call that breakfast. And then literally just scramble, just stirring it until it was done cooking with a little bacon and cheese in there, and that was breakfast. I would eat, like a Subway foot-long chicken sandwich, and I would eat cans of tuna, and it was just shoveling protein down my throat. It wasn't so much, And then on show nights, it was pizza and burgers with the guys, and pizza, burgers, and beers with the guys. So,
okay. If we were a big commercial radio station, I would have a block of commercials to play. We don't do that here. WVLP is all volunteer nonprofit, so we don't have. We're like NPR. We have sponsors of shows, and we don't have commercials. But instead of a commercial break, maybe I'll take a quick music break here.
Okay.
We can have a sip of water and stretch our legs, and then when we come back, we'll talk about the Chicago scene that you're involved in right now.
Okay.
And how expansive that is, and maybe then play on the kind of the wrestling/food crossover and see what advice you have for if there's any young wrestlers out there that are learning the craft. what advice in terms of training and fitness you might have for them and nutrition.
Okay.
Sound good? And you had mentioned when I was talking to you, or not talking, but typing at you, that you were kind of an old school metal fan. If you had to pick metal, it might be Metallica or something along those lines. So how about we listen to the title track off of Master of Puppets?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. We'll be back in just a few minutes here on the Northwest Indiana Wrestling Action Program on WVLP.